Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us on a here in Houston rainy Saturday afternoon. We are so excited today to have Alice Feeney and Samantha Downing with us. Samantha Downing's new book, He Started It, just came out. She currently lives in New Orleans, where she is furiously typing away on her next thrilling book. Last year's book, My Lovely Wife, which we were all huge fans of at the store, was a finalist for the Edgar Award, the Thriller Award, and the Macavity for Best First Mystery. Alice Feeney is a writer and journalist. She spent 15 years with BBC News, where she worked as a reporter, news editor, arts and entertainment producer, and 1 o'clock news producer. She's lived in London and Sydney and is now settled in the Surrey countryside, where she lives with her husband and dog. Sometimes I Lie, her best-selling novel, is being made into a TV series by a major film studio, and her new novel, His and Hers, is her third. So how are y'all doing today?
Good. Hello. Lovely to see you.
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. We were just saying before we got started, Samantha, that you were said that you weren't able to make it to the store. We were too. We had so much fun last time with you and Liv Constantine. So thank you for being able to do this with us today. If you guys are watching on Facebook, you can leave questions for any of them in the Facebook chat. We'll be monitoring that, and after I've chatted with them for a little bit, we will relay any of those questions. It looks like we've got some comments going already, so that's fantastic. So real quick, just to get started, real easy question. Do you guys want to give us an elevator pitch for your new book? And we'll start with you, Alice.
Hello. Yes, His and Hers. I always feel as though authors aren't really allowed to have favourites. It's a bit like children, but His and Hers is definitely mine. And it's the story of a BBC newsreader called Ada Andrews and a detective called Jack Harper. And we find out what happens when she gets sent to report on the murder he is currently investigating. And as always, I like to put a little twist in the tale.
All right, and you, Samantha?
He Started It is about three siblings and two of their spouses who have to go on a road trip in order to get their grandfather's inheritance. And along the way have to deal with a lot of family secrets and grudges and scores to settle.
So Alice, I was just reading an interview with you, and I thought, and you just mentioned this as well, I thought it was interesting that you said, you know, kind of books are like your children, you're not supposed to have a favorite. I thought it was great that you actually said this is your favorite, because you almost never hear authors say, hey, this is my favorite. Usually they say like, oh, the one that I'm working on next is their favorite. So I thought that was great. You mentioned, both of you kind of mentioned kind of twists with books. And you both write kind of darker, kind of psychological stuff that deals with kind of family issues and things like that. How do you, as you're writing, do you know what your twists are going to be? And how do you keep it fresh when kind of now readers who read a lot of psychological suspense, kind of the genre itself has moved towards kind of twist being that kind of big thing. So how do you keep it fresh with twists, knowing that readers are going to expect a twist that's coming? Let's start with you this time, Samantha.
I don't plot my books and I don't outline them and I don't know what the twists are going to be. So I write the book as it comes to me and I discover the book the same way a reader would. In my experience, thriller readers, especially psychological thriller readers, are very sophisticated when it comes to twists. They've read a lot, they're looking for it, they know it's coming. I prefer to have multiple twists throughout the book, and not a book that revolves around one big twist, so that maybe some you figure out and some you don't. And so you get surprised both ways. I think readers are disappointed when they figure it out. They don't really want to, but it can't be so far out of left field. It's impossible to figure out. So it is a fine line, I would say.
I'm the opposite. I do like to plot everything out, and I think I'm the same in real life as well. So if I'm taking my dog for a big walk, I always have to know where we're going, or I spend the entire journey worrying about getting lost. And I find it's the same for me when I'm planning the book. So I have a big board in my writing shed with the whole story plotted out. But that doesn't mean things don't change when I start writing the book. And I also think there's no right or wrong way to write a thriller. Every writer just has to find the way that works best for them. And like Samantha, I like multiple twists. The more twists, the better. And I love it when I read a book where I don't guess the twist, or especially where I'm reading a book and I think I've got it and then I haven't. I always think that's really good fun. It's like trying to solve an impossible puzzle. So that's always what I'm trying to do with every book.
So as readers, when you're reading, are you trying to figure out the twist, or are you one of those, you're just kind of along the ride and you want to like let it happen as it happens? But
I want to know. I always want to know, and that's what I love about Samantha's books as well. She always gets me, and it's always just reading and reading and turning the pages as fast as I can, trying to get there. And it's such good fun when you read a book that's so cleverly plotted out that way with such a clever story, but you know that if you were to go back and read the whole thing again, the clues were there if only you knew how to spot them.
I usually try to figure it out. Every once in a while I come across a book that takes me away enough that I'm just enjoying the reading. But for the most part, I am still a thriller reader, and I'm trying to figure it out. And I did not figure out Alice's in this book, and I was one of the early readers of it, and it blew me away. All of her books have blown me away from the beginning. Sometimes I lie, so Alice is good.
You too.
I'm also, or I'm kind of like Alice, where I don't try to figure it out. Like sometimes, like, and like you, I kind of love those ones where you think that you figured it out, and maybe you've gotten like some part of it, but you haven't gotten like this whole other thing. And like, I think the best ones are where you're like, oh my God, I totally didn't see this. But then you can totally, if you think about it, you can see kind of where all of those like kind of clues were laid out. Have you ever tried, either one of you, to write and have a twist that just didn't work, that you had to change because it just didn't fit for the story, or it wasn't kind of believable?
Not yet. Sometimes things do change as the story goes along, or sometimes my brain will come up with extra little twists. Or once my agent came up with a brilliant twist, and I could not put that in too. So yeah, sometimes things change a little bit, but the main twists, no, they tend to be there from the beginning, and it's quite fun as you go along, dropping little clues and little hints and thinking, is it too much of a clue? Will people guess from this? But it's fun. It's fun to write thrillers in the same way that it's really good fun, I think, to read them.
I can't think of any major twists I've ever changed. Small ones, but nothing I think that was huge. No.
One of the things I think that's kind of great about about kind of domestic suspense in these great thrillers is they tend to be kind of dark in a way that like a grisly police procedural isn't, where people wouldn't necessarily pick up something that's super grisly like that. But these thrillers can kind of really get into kind of, you know, dark family secrets, dark things like that, but just kind of keep people compulsively reading them. Why do you think that kind of darkness versus kind of a more grisly kind of on-screen darkness, why do you think kind of one works for more people and one doesn't for the other?
I think it's scarier when you get into the minds of people. It's scarier than just describing something that's gruesome. I don't personally get into anything that's gory or gruesome. It's all really implied. The scarier part is normal people, normal appearing people that have this darkness inside of them. And that is, it starts to make you wonder. After My Lovely Wife, I had people tell me they would never want to live next door to me because they were afraid of what I might do, apparently. So it had people thinking about what's going on behind their neighbors' doors, and that's scary because it's so close to home.
I think I do sometimes go quite dark. I think I'm definitely guilty of that from time to time, but I think the world we live in is quite a dark place, and so I don't really mind reflecting that a little bit in my stories. But also, I think we've all known a horrible boss, or we've all known someone who's had an unpleasant partner. And I always find it more interesting to try and understand why that person is behaving in that very dark, unpleasant way. And sometimes that's more interesting than the thing they're doing in itself. So I always get a bit of fun and a bit of interest into exploring why people do the dark things that they do, more than what those things are themselves.
And so Alice, in your book, your character has a relationship with BBC and kind of with news, and you definitely come from a background of that. So how were you trying to kind of accurately portray kind of what that was like using your own background, or how much of that did you kind of get to play with?
The main female character in His and Hers, Anna Andrews, she lived inside my head for a very long time. Jack came along later, much later, when I started to think about really seriously writing the book. I always think about them for a long time before I start tapping away. But Anna isn't really based on anyone real in the BBC newsroom. I think because I worked there for such a long time, I always thought that would be a really interesting backdrop for a thriller. And because it's a world that I've come from and I understand, it felt like a good place to set this one. And I loved exploring that, and I loved revisiting the newsroom, even in my imagination. It was quite good fun to do. And I hope that it comes across as quite an authentic setting, because I certainly worked there long enough to do the research to hopefully make it feel that way.
And so Samantha, with yours, since your book is based on a road trip, did you actually go on a road trip, or what kind of research did you do? Or like, did you stop at any like kind of the weird little roadside attractions that are in the book?
I didn't go on a road trip to write this book, but I have driven across the country before, and I have seen some of those places, but not all of them. And I did do a lot of research online into weird roadside attractions off the beaten path. So everything in the book is real as far as where they stop and what they do, which was a lot of fun to try to figure out the kind of places this family would go, because they wouldn't go anywhere normal.
And I want to talk a little bit about titles. Samantha, I love yours. He started it. It's such, you know, just like a car road trip taunt from a child, but like kind of in the concept of this thriller, it's just kind of so dark. Was that always the title, or did you bounce some other ones around?
No, that was always the title. Starting with my lovely wife. My lovely wife is a common phrase that here is my lovely wife, Jill, or whoever. And so I wanted to continue that into the next book and take a common phrase I used to say all the time about my brother. He started it. And so that I didn't want to use the word sister or the word brother in the title, because there are both sisters and brother in the book. So I wanted to imply siblings, but also have it be somewhat familiar, a familiar phrase that gets twisted in a dark way.
And Alice, do you want to tell us a little about the title for His and Hers? Was that also yours, or did you go through other incarnations?
Yeah, His and Hers was always the title for this one, just because I knew I had to tell Anna's story. She was very loud inside my head. And then when Jack came along, he wanted his say too. So they kind of came up with the title themselves, if that doesn't sound too crazy.
No, not at all. So Samantha, we were talking a little bit about this before we got started, that the book was supposed to come out in, was it April, potentially? Yeah, and like, I think we were talking about dates. I think we actually had one on schedule. Can you talk a little bit about the process of the decision to delay the book with everything going on?
Yes, I had just been on tour for the paperback of My Lovely Wife the very first week of March, and things were deteriorating at that point. And I think as soon as I got back from that tour was when the NBA canceled their season and everybody started shutting down. And I believe it was around the end of March, I got a call from my editor and my agent asking me about moving the book, and saying they wanted to move it because all the bookstores were shut down. All the independent bookstores were shut down. There was nowhere for people, all the Barnes and Noble, everything was shut down. So they asked about moving it into the summer, and I agreed it was a good idea, and we did. So it was moved to July, and some stores are open and now can sell it like you can sell the book. So it's great.
Yeah, it was a really weird, I guess, middle of March. We had a bunch of stuff scheduled. I think our last in-store event was March 13th with Deanna Rayburn. And at that point, Penguin Random House had really started pulling people that were out on tour in and saying like, that's it, we're not doing any more tours, at least for the rest of the month. And people that were kind of already on the road were able to decide kind of whether they wanted to keep going or not. So it's been strange for us that, you know, we usually host 2 or 3 in-store author events a week, that we haven't had like an actual author talk at the store. We've had a couple of people drop by who live locally to sign some stock for us, but it was definitely kind of strange. It was also really weird on the book selling end that there was a lot of stuff that came out kind of April, May, and June that got moved around. So even if people were able to come into the stores, there was this, like, we would have people call and they're like, what new has come out? We're like, oh, there's not a whole lot of stuff because this was going to come out here, but now it's going to come out there. So it's definitely a very strange time. Alice, was there any talk about delaying or moving around your pub date?
We decided to keep things the same as they always were in the US, but in the UK I was pushed back by a month. So instead of coming out in April, I came out in May here. And I think it's just been so tough for everybody, really, very tough for publishers, very tough for authors and booksellers, because nobody knows what's really going on at the moment. Everything changes every day. But I'd just like to say thank you, really, to everyone who's been involved with my book, because everyone, the publishers, the booksellers, the bloggers, everyone did such a fantastic, amazing job of trying to get the book out there. And I really appreciate it, especially in such difficult times.
It's been kind of one of the really cool things to see as kind of the book industry as a whole kind of rally around each other, authors and booksellers. We've had one of the first online events that we did, a publicist was like, hey, why don't you try doing it this way? Let me explain to you how we've done all of this stuff before. So they helped us figure out how to do a virtual event, and then other bookstores reached out to us. So it's really been great to see everybody trying to figure out kind of what's working, what's not working, and kind of sharing tips and tricks. So tips and tricks so everybody could kind of get up to speed and figure out some way to have some kind of normal semblance of what's going on. So in the comments on Facebook, Becky asks, do you have any input on your cover design? Let's start with you on this one, Alice.
Yes and no. So in the US, I'm on cover number 3. This was my first one, which I loved, and I'll never forget being sent a picture of Sometimes I Lie and just being so excited because it's the first time I'd ever seen a cover of a book of mine. And the trees on His and Hers. I live in a tiny little cottage in the Surrey countryside, and I have woods at the front of my home and woods at the back. And so it felt as though they'd spied on me. Maybe they were looking through the webcam on my laptop, and my publishers just knew that I'd like that. But I really like the American cover, and the UK cover looks like this with the friendship bracelet ampersand, which I also love. I think I've been really lucky. I just actually quite like all of my book covers, but I came up with that idea with the friendship bracelet, and my UK editor came up with the same idea. So that was great, and we just went with that.
And how about you, Samantha?
For both of the books, I was sent 2 covers and asked which one I liked better. And in both cases, everybody liked the same one better. For My Lovely Wife, the one with the knife, and this one with the shovel. So we got lucky. I'm not sure what would happen if I picked the one and everybody picked a different one, but that hasn't happened yet.
Samantha, are your UK covers different than your US ones?
They are. The UK covers both have a woman's face on the cover. Oh, thank you. And that's the He Started It cover. And the My Lovely Wife is a little bit similar with the same woman, sort of half in shadow. And those covers they send to me, and they're great. I love those too. It's a different take on it, having a weapon on the book versus not a weapon on the book.
It's always interesting to me to see the UK covers, because I feel like the UK kind of across all different publishers, like there's sort of a kind of font and style wise, there's kind of a style that they go with, where here with the US, it kind of just depends on which publisher, and so like kind of everything's not quite as uniform. It's always interesting to me to see kind of what works for what in different formats. So Alice, so you said like your pub dates were different between here and there. Has that been the case for all of yours, or do they try to kind of get them to come out as close together as possible?
Yes, they've always been quite different. In fact, my first book, I think, just came out in Japan, so where there's a bit of a delay with that, but that's quite exciting, really. It just keeps everything going, and I think I regularly still find it hard to believe that I'm allowed to do this for a job and that my books are out there. So every time I see them, it's kind of like a wow moment and a bit of a pinch yourself moment, and very exciting.
Samantha, how about you? Do you have US and UK pub dates? Are they fairly close?
Actually, that was different. Last year they were fairly close. This year they did not move their date when the pandemic hit. So the UK book still came out April 30th, And then it was only the US version that was delayed. But the first time around, they were within a couple weeks of each other. So I'm not sure what will happen next year, but I think that they try to keep them together as much as possible.
So how did you guys get started with writing? Samantha, let's start with you.
I started as a hobby about 20 years ago, probably. I would say when I got my first computer, it was when I really started, as opposed to working on a typewriter. And I did it as a hobby for 20 years. And My Lovely Wife was actually the 12th book that I wrote. It was just the first one that was published. And I just did it because I loved it, like you do any hobby.
See, now I just want to read all of Samantha's other books. Now I know there are 11 other ones. I need to be sent them straight away. It took me a while too. I started seriously trying to write my first novel about 10 years ago. And I spent a lot of time working on it, and I sent it off. Then I collected all the rejections from agents. And I actually think that's a rite of passage for a lot of authors. It's just what you go through. And then, yes, almost 10 years later, after dusting myself off a few times, I wrote a book called Sometimes I Lie, and suddenly everything changed in a very magical, wonderful way. And I still feel very lucky that it did.
So the trunk books that you worked on before you got something published, are those things that y'all have held onto and you might potentially go back and mine those for things, or are they just kind of locked away, never to be heard from again?
I don't think anyone should ever read those books that I've written. I think it's best to just sometimes move on. And I think you learn. I think every book I write, I hope I get a little bit better. I think you grow as an author and as a writer. So I'm really grateful for those experiences, even though the rejections were quite hard to take sometimes, and a little bit worse than heartbreak on occasion. They help you, and you get better, and you learn, and you carry on, and you hopefully write better books.
I agree. I would never go back to those books. They aren't even all thrillers. I mean, that's just all practice to me. And there's nothing, I think you have to just go forward from where you are, and there isn't any idea I would pull out of them. And I don't even have them all anymore. Some of them are on old computers I don't even have anymore. So I prefer when I die, nobody find all the bad writing. So
Deanna Rayburn says that. She said, same thing, kind of she had an agent and they worked for years for things that just weren't working, and she still has them, but that her daughter has very strict instructions upon her death to burn everything so that way it doesn't fall into anybody's hands. So do you guys read within the psychological suspense genre, or do you try to read something that's kind of completely different when you're writing?
I can do either one. I write only in the morning and I read only at night, so it's separated. And I can do either one. It doesn't matter, because in my mind they're two completely separate things, and so there's no crossover between reading time and writing time.
Similarly, I read all the time. Nothing really changes, even if I'm writing a first draft. I'm always reading, and I read all genres, but I do confess that thrillers do tend to be my favorites, and the twistier, the better.
Awesome. So what is something that either of y'all have read recently that you loved?
His and Hers by Alice Feeney.
Well, obviously, this is my favorite. Yeah, I've read some really great thrillers this year. I've read lots of great debuts as well this year, books that are either out now or coming out soon. I think there's so much talent in this genre, and there's so much emerging talent, which is very exciting. It's always really thrilling to discover a new, brave new voice.
So you guys both blurbed each other's books. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the blurb process? Start with you, Samantha.
Sure. Alice Feeney, I think I was asked to blurb your book. I can't remember, but I heard from you and you said, how do I get a copy of your book?
I did. I think I said, who do I need to bribe to get your book?
Right, exactly. And my UK publisher got a copy to her, and she very generously sent me a blurb from it. And that's sometimes the greatest thing as an author, to hear from an author you admire who wants to read your book or loves to read your book. And I think it's a mixture of, I try not to contact people I've never talked to on social media, because that's a little weird to get a random message from a person you've never physically spoken to. So I think there are some that my editor sends out, and there are some people that I know who I will contact directly and see if they have the time to read it. And everybody's always in a different place when you're writing. You're in the writing process, you're in the editing process, you're in the promoting process because your book just came out. So people sometimes just don't have the time to fit it in or what have you, which is fine. And I'm the same way when people ask me. I try to always say yes, but sometimes you just can't.
I remember last year I was lucky enough to be in America for my book launch, and I'd never seen my book in America, and I was going to various bookshops and some amazing indie bookshops, and everywhere I saw my book, I would see this book next to it that said Samantha Downing, my lovely wife, with this very shiny cover with the knife. I kept thinking, what is this book? Who is this person who I keep seeing everywhere? So I bought the book on my American tour last year, and I was reading it on tour, on a train or on a plane. I thought, this is amazing. Who is this person? And so I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait to read Samantha's second book this year. And I was delighted when it was just as brilliant as her first. But I think with blurbs, you do get sent a lot of proofs as an author to read, and you do of course do your best to try and read as many of them as you can, and I do, but if you read a blurb by me, it means I really love the book. I think it's against my book religion to blurb a book I don't love. So if my name's on the cover, it means it's a great book in my mind.
Yeah, I think that's one of the kind of blessings and curses about being in the industry, is like you said, you get to get these stuff, and you get to get it early, and like there's so much stuff out there. It's always so hard to get to all of it. We say this all the time, like a book will come in, and a galley will come in, and you'll be meaning to get to it, you get today's shipment, you open it up, and you're like, oh, there's a book that I failed because I didn't get to it. And you think, I'm going to hang on to that galley until the paperback comes out, because I'm going to read it before the paperback comes out. And then the paperback comes out, and you're like, oh, I really didn't get there. So it's sort of a blessing and a curse that you have this wealth of stuff out there, but not necessarily always all of the time to get to it.
I think it's wonderful. I think we're very lucky, but my postman does hate me. We live on a big hill, so you have to lug them up the hill all the time.
Yeah, I'll come home with a giant bag of books, and my husband will be like, where did all of that come from? You didn't have it. It's like, but all of the new galleys for the publishers came in today, and I need this giant stack of books. So speaking of kind of having plenty of time to do things, have you guys been able to get to focus and get any writing done while the world has been kind of on its great pause?
I was lucky that during the initial quarantine period, I was in edits for my next book. So I didn't have to be creative, which was easier to focus on. And it's a little more of a logical process when you're going through revisions and not as directly creative. So that was lucky, because I had started and stopped probably 6 different books during the period that just never took off and what have you. So I'm lucky that I did not have to be creative, because I wasn't coming up with anything good.
I've still been writing, but very slowly, which is quite unusual for me. So I had a deadline in the middle of all of this, which was fun. But that's done, and that book is handed in. So there'll be a book out next year, which is exciting. And I've been trying since then to work on something new and succeeding, but slowly. You have days where everything is just happening, and you feel like, you're in Murder, She Wrote, and you can hear the theme tune and you're tapping away. and then you have those days where you've sat there all day long with a few biscuits to keep you going, and there seem to be only 3 new sentences on the page. So it's been a bit like that, but getting there.
So when you're in those early processes, how do you know, like, if something is an idea that you're going to stick with, or like at what point do you realize that it maybe isn't something that's not working, or something that's not working that you potentially have to put down? Like Samantha, you said you had started like 6 different things. So what's that process for figuring out which ones are the ones to pursue?
Well, because I don't plot my books, it's just whether the idea takes off in my mind or not. And if I'm bored, I figure the reader will be bored, and I put it down, and I just don't see a future for it, or it no longer interests me. If it no longer interests me, then chances are I'm never going to get through an entire book. So it takes a few times until I hit something that is like, this is it. And then I get to the 20,000 word mark and I usually hate it and I want to throw it out. And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. So when you're not working with a plot, it becomes probably a lot easier to just toss the whole thing.
I think for a very long time, I had no idea that other authors did that. I thought it was just me. So it made me feel a lot better when I realized that other authors do also sometimes not finish their books or change their minds about their books. I had a book 2 years ago that I spent 9 months working on, really hard, barely went out. I was very antisocial. I was in that kind of Murder, She Wrote phase where everything was wonderful, but I got to the end of the book and I wouldn't let anybody read it. And I still haven't let anybody read it because I felt like there was something wrong with it. It was only this summer that I figured out what was wrong. So I think sometimes there are books that just take a little bit longer or aren't quite ready to meet anyone else yet. They don't feel quite brave enough, or perhaps they're just a bit shy. And there are other books that write themselves very quickly. And I think for me, it's different with every book, which keeps life fun and interesting, keeps me on my toes.
So as you're reading for pleasure, are y'all you have to finish every book you start, or are you willing to just throw something aside if it's not working?
Oh, if I don't like the book, I don't carry on reading.
Yeah.
No, life's too short and the world is full of brilliant books. So no, if I'm not enjoying the book, I'm afraid I'm one of those people who will put it down.
I'm the same. I'll put the book down. There are times when it's just the wrong book at the wrong time, and I've picked it up later on and thought it was great, but at that moment it's not. But no, I don't force myself to finish it if I'm not into it.
Yeah, I'm the same way. And like you, Samantha, like sometimes you can tell, like you're like, I'm liking this, but maybe it's not clicking, and it will later. So there's the, no, I'm done with this, I'm never going to pick it up again pile, and then there's the, I'm going to pick this back up again when I've got kind of more brain power for it. So another question from Facebook. This one's for Samantha. Carrie asks, what made you choose a tennis pro for Tobias in My Lovely Wife?
Oh, in My Lovely Wife, for actually both the Tobias and Millicent, I needed characters, I needed jobs that would allow them movement. I needed them not stuck in a cubicle all day. Being a real estate agent, you're on the road all the time. And being a tennis pro, he had time in between his appointments to do things. And it also lent to the fact that it was in Florida. The weather's always nice. He was outdoors all the time. And I sort of pictured him as that country club kind of guy. So in both of those jobs, it allowed them more freedom than an office job.
It's interesting. Because, you know, as you're reading a book, you don't think that like, oh, you had to plan out all of these facets of all of these characters, their lives. And, you know, people, when they talk about like science fiction and fantasy, they often talk about world building, but I don't think people talk about enough kind of about world building when you're writing mysteries and thrillers, because you guys are still kind of doing that. Do you plan out like character sketches as you're starting a book so you sort of know who they are, or are you discovering them as you write?
Yes.
I do not. Sorry, go ahead. I don't plan anything at all, so go ahead.
I find it so funny that we are opposite in that way. Yes, especially with Sometimes I Lie, I kept thinking about this character called Amber Reynolds, and then one night I had a dream about her, a very vivid dream. And when I woke up, I thought, I'm just going to write down what I can remember. And I literally wrote, my name is Amber Reynolds. There are 3 things you need to know about me. 1, I'm in a coma. 2, my husband doesn't love me anymore. 3, sometimes I lie. And that dream, that's like obsession with the character, so much so that I'm thinking about her even when I was asleep, became the opening of the novel. So yes, I think about them a lot. I worry that sometimes I write very dark characters who I don't have a huge amount in common with, I'm pleased to say, in some ways. But I always remember one character who was quite aggressive. And for the first time ever, I had road rage when I was writing her. And I would be out driving and suddenly thinking, how do I hoot the horn? I'd never even hooted the horn in the car before. And suddenly I was turning into this scary lady. So they can take over sometimes. But I promise I've never killed anyone. It's fine.
So Samantha, do you have any bleed over from your characters with you for day-to-day life like that?
No, not that I know, not that I've noticed. That's a scary thing. It could have happened and I've never noticed, but no.
So another question we've just been asking authors is, do you think that kind of COVID-19 coronavirus, this time period, is something that you will address in your books? Or is this something that, like, when it's all said and done, you're going to be happy to move on and never think about ever again?
I've given this a lot of thought, and in the beginning, I thought it would be over quickly and it would be a blip, and it's very obviously not going to be, especially not in the US. And being from New Orleans, we have Katrina. We had Katrina, and everybody who lived here for Katrina, our lives are now marked by it. It is, everything is before Katrina and after Katrina because everybody's life changed. But I think it's going to be the same for COVID, and people's lives are going to change. Maybe they'll work from home forever instead of ever going back to an office. Maybe they'll change jobs. Maybe they'll lose a business. Maybe they'll open a business. So I don't think ignoring it is an option. I wouldn't write a book about the pandemic, but it has to be addressed, that it has to be mentioned that it happened. From here on out, I think, unless you're writing a fantasy book, this is something that's too huge and can't be completely ignored.
Yeah.
I feel the same way. It's something that has touched all of our lives in one way or another. So it'd be hard not to factor it into a story. I have written about it in a short story, which unusually for me had to have a happy ending. I think that was my own feelings on the subject. I just needed to write something where there was going to be an outcome where it wasn't too awful. There was going to be some kind of positive to come out of all the terrible things that everyone has been going through. But in terms of my novels, I don't plan to mention it at the moment, but yes, it would be hard to write anything where it didn't become a factor.
Yeah, we're secretly hoping that this will see like a revival in like locked room mysteries. Since everybody's been stuck at home, maybe we'll see some more locked room mysteries. I think we were talking with Drew Murray, and he said the book that he was working on was supposed to take place in March of this year, and he was like, oh, well, that clearly can't work because because people are going to be aware of this, like people aren't going to believe that this character was able to go out and be in a crowd. So he had to shift the timeline of the whole book. I think Jennifer Hillier said that she thought that we were going to see a lot of books that are set sort of in 2019 and a lot of things that are set in like 2021, but then like 2020 might just be kind of this black hole in fiction for a while, which I don't know that as a reader, I mean, definitely not right now, would not want to pick up anything that was kind of dealing with it. It's funny, Emily St. John Mandel, who wrote Station 11, which is this beautiful plague book, was a big favorite at the store. As kind of stuff started closing down, people online were like, oh, I think now is the perfect time to read this plague book. And she actually said on Twitter, like, I think maybe you should just hold on to for a little bit and maybe not read it right now. And one of the things that we love kind of about the genre that we with Murder by the Book being mysteries and with you guys is just like thrillers. They offer such a great escape for people. So I know we've heard from lots of people, both through the digital events and just customers calling the store. I know everybody's so thankful to have these books and thrillers like yours that people can just kind of immerse themselves in and just kind of get lost and forget the world for a little bit. So as you guys are reading for pleasure, are you able to just kind of detach and like get lost in a book, or do you have your writer hat on and you're thinking, how did this work? Did this work? Did this not work?
I think the goal is always to get lost in the book. I mean, that's what you want. And so I can, and then at other times I'm not. I find myself analyzing it. So I think it just depends on my mindset at the moment. I don't want to analyze the book. I'm not a critic, so I'm not looking to review it in any way. I want to just enjoy it as a reader, and that's always the goal.
I think so too. You just want to enjoy it as a reader. I find if it's not a thriller, it's easier for me to get lost in the book. If it is a thriller, I'm constantly trying to guess what the twist is or who did what.
So I know you guys both just had new books come out within the last couple of days, but can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on or what you've got coming up next?
Yes, so next year's book is written. I'm pleased to say that will be out next spring. And by pure coincidence, it was interesting what you were just saying. It's it takes place in February this year, but not because I was trying to get in before all of this, but mainly because it's all based around a leap year. So that will be out next year, and it's another dark and twisty thriller about a couple who've been married for 10 years and what can happen when a couple go away for a weekend together and things aren't quite what they seem.
My next book is done. I'm just finishing up the final revisions on it, and it is another thriller out in 2021, and that's all I can say.
Awesome. So Becky asked in the comments, where do your ideas come from? Do you start with a specific plot, or is it a character, or maybe like a news clipping that just kind of gets your brain going?
For me, it's normally the characters that I fall in love with. And it is a bit like falling in love or some kind of obsession where you just keep thinking about these people all of the time as though they're very real. And then you wonder about the things that you can do to them. And I guess I'm quite unkind in that way because I do some horrible things to my characters. But yes, it tends to start with that, and then it works its way out in terms of the twists and the setting, and everything else comes later.
Yeah, I think mine always starts with a character, and then the question is always, so what's this character gonna do? And what the character actually has to do something. So that's it, but it starts with a vision of a character.
So you guys both do kind of standalone thrillers, which we're really pleased to see, like in the last, I don't know, 8 or 10 years, people have really started to embrace them. We love our series too, but we love great standalone thrillers. Have y'all considered doing series before, or what is it about standalones that you love writing?
I think I get bored very easily. So I quite like that every year I get to hang out with new characters and go somewhere new and do something different. So I think that's part of it for me. There is one book which I've always planned to do a sequel for, which I will write at some point, maybe even the book after next. But most of the time I prefer just to start afresh. Sometimes I keep settings, Blackdown in His and Hers. I'm so fond of Blackdown. It's a completely made up place, but I spent so long writing there inside my head that it feels so real to me. I miss it. So I'm going back to Blackdown in a future book, just as a setting. But otherwise, yes, I like to start afresh.
So you're sort of creating kind of almost a shared world instead of like kind of a full story. I love shared world stuff like that, and you might potentially see stuff pop up here and there. How about you, Samantha?
I do also get bored very easily. I have about a 6-month attention span when it comes to a book. If I can't get it done in 6 months, I'm bored with it. And so it has to be about that time frame. The shared world I do as well. The narrator He Started It lives in Woodview, Florida, which is where the couple in My Lovely Wife lived in. They lived in a gated community within Woodview, Florida. So I like putting all the crazies in one place, I guess. I don't know. Originally, I did think I was going to write a sequel to My Lovely Wife. That was my original idea. And I told my agent that, and she said, sometimes we have to let go. That was the end. No sequel. So I had an idea in my head and she disagreed. And so I moved on to the next book, and that was that.
Can you tell us what the idea was?
I had thought about doing a prequel to the book. Actually, it was a prequel about Millicent and her sister Holly.
Ooh, interesting.
And she said, we already know what happens. We already know what happens at the end. There's no suspense. So that was a good point. And then that was the end of that.
So George asks, Alice, you mentioned that you just wrote a short story. How are you able to limit yourself with a short story, not wanting to add more characters and plot ideas?
Well, it was a magazine that asked me to write the short story, and it was a bit more like my journalist days because there is a word count. And I confess, it had been such a long time since I'd written something so short. It was quite a struggle to pack all of that story into, I think it was 800 words, very short. but you do. And the same with novel writing, you do a first draft, and for me, then you just keep taking things out and editing and editing and editing, and everything keeps shrinking until you're within your word count in this case. But also, I often think the stories are better for it. You can tell when a story has a little bit too much flab and needed editing and hacking away at for a bit longer. And I think the best thrillers, like Samantha's, move very fast. They're the kind of stories where there's no flab, there's nothing at all, and you just have to keep turning the pages until late into the night to find out what's going to happen next.
Samantha, have you done any short stories?
No, not in a very long time. Just early on I had.
So kind of talking about that pacing, like when I read My Lovely Wife, I was at Winter Institute in Albuquerque, and I had like 60 pages of the book left before the next session. And I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go sit in the quiet room and I'm going to like inhale the rest of this book because I have to know what happens. How do you know when you're plotting your thriller, how do you know kind of what stuff you need to cut out of it to keep that pacing going?
Well, since I don't plot, my writing comes out very sparse as it is. Everything is important. Everything I mention is important, and I never overwrite. I'm not one of those writers that writes 150,000 words and has to cut 50,000. I'm coming right up to the line, so of what the minimum would be when I write. So I guess I don't have a problem with cutting. It's usually all, or I usually have to go back and expand on some things as opposed to cut.
I think if you have time, deadlines permitting, where you can leave something alone for a little while and then come back to it, that's helpful. I think if you're writing every day, certainly with His and Hers, it was 3 months of me being very antisocial and not really seeing people, and I was locked away in the writing shed with the dog and the laptop, and that was it. But if you can come back after that period when you're not so close to the book yourself, you can sometimes spot the right things to remove, or you can spot where this could be faster, we could get there a little bit quicker if we try.
And is it something that you kind of start to develop kind of a feel for naturally the more books you write, or is every book completely different?
I find every book completely different. Every book is a different adventure. Every book will have its different high points and its different low points. And I think whenever I start a new book, for me, I'm always terrified. For me, I always think, how did I do this before? But then you just keep going and the word count goes up. I tend to aim for about 60,000 for a first draft, which is actually very short. So I do end up taking stuff out and then putting more stuff in. But once I get to 60,000, I feel like I've got my first draft.
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of sitting down and writing. I don't feel like I know how to write a book, but I have to just sit down and do it anyway. And each book is different. Actually, the next book that's coming out is the first one I've done that's told from multiple points of view. And the first two were told from one point of view. So with each book, I want to do something that's a little different, if only to not get repetitive, I suppose.
And I think one of the cool things about social media is we have, we're able to see a little bit more process. You see writers talking about, I'm working on this book and I've hit this point, and every time I'm writing a book, I hit this point and I think I don't know what I'm doing. And you get to see kind of people talk about the fact that it's not just kind of this thing that just kind of spurts forth easily and organically all the time, that it's work, and there's a lot of effort that goes into it, and uncertainty, because like you said, like they're not always the same thing. Is that something that makes it easier for you as you're writing on something to see other creative people kind of talking about it not just being a breeze for them?
Yes, in fact, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, you go.
I was going to say, just before I got on this, I saw that Judy Blume was trending on Twitter, and I clicked it and I saw a quote from her that said, determination is more important than talent. And I think that's what it is. I fail every day at writing. I write things every day that I will never use, that I will delete. And the stuff that makes it into a book is 1/100th of what I've written in my life. So That's just what you have to go through. That's the level of practice, the least that it takes me.
It's the same for me, and I would never. It does make me feel better to know that other authors go through the same things, but I would never let anyone read one of my first drafts. I wouldn't let my dog read my first draft. So before I'll even share a book with my agent, it's draft number 3 at least. So there's a lot of work and a lot of polishing that goes on behind the scenes that I think sometimes people might forget.
I like that both got an emphatic yes from both of you at the same time. That's great. So I got time for one more question. Becky asks, what's it like to kill off a character? Do you miss them, or do you sort of have that person deserved to die feeling?
I love killing the baddies. I get great satisfaction out of that. If there's someone who has behaved really badly and maybe the character thinks that they deserve it, then yes. There have been characters who I thought about killing off and couldn't quite do it because it didn't feel right to me. So they always argue for themselves. They argue their own case during the writing process.
I don't know that I feel bad. I don't know what that says about me, but I think it's some characters just have an inevitable conclusion in my mind, and it was always lurking there in the background until I figured it out.
And so, okay, so I do have one more question. So my coworker Rebecca, who's watching from home, Samantha asks, out of all of the siblings and he started it, do you have a favorite and why?
And that's a tough one. I have to say 2 of them. Eddie, because Eddie is like my older brother, and he's based on my older brother, only not as evil, but he's that guy who's charming. Everybody loves him. He knows everybody. He has connections everywhere. That's my brother. And that Portia is personally the one most like me. I'm the baby of the family. I was separated by a lot of years to my stepsisters and sort of the 5th wheel of the group. So, and she's kind of there alone without her spouse. So Portia is the most personal, but Eddie, I'm the most familiar with.
So with your characters, Alice, do you have any that you feel kind of are close to you or that you've based on people that you know, kind of like Samantha mentioned?
No, if I knew people like this, I'd have to get them out of my life very quickly. No, I think you can always spot little things. All of the characters are made from people that you've met or seen or spoken to, and I can recognize little bits of myself. Somebody was talking about Jack Harper a couple of days ago and how he has a naughty chocolate habit where he hides chocolate for himself and then eats it once a day. I do that. So, you know, there are little things that creep in, but there are definitely some very bad things that my characters have done, which I promise I never have in real life.
Well, if you tuned in late, we've been chatting with Samantha Downing, whose novel He Started It just came out, as well as Alice Feeney, and her novel His and Hers has just come out as well. We have copies of both of them in the store. If you missed the first part of the chat, once we're done, Facebook will archive it, so you'll be able to watch it there. We'll also get it added to the Murder by the Book YouTube channel in the next couple of days. You can check that out for all of our author conversations that we've done. Next Tuesday, we're going to be chatting with Adele Parks and Lisa Jewell at 1 o'clock Central Time. We're super excited about that. We just got an event with Ruth Ware and Sophie Hanna set up for September. We're going to be chatting with them about how Golden Age mysteries have inspired them. So we've got a really great lineup coming up. As I mentioned, the store is still closed for browsing, but we are doing curbside pickup and mail orders. So you can visit us at murderbooks.com and find out what's going on. Alice and Samantha, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a wonderful chat this afternoon. I'm sorry we weren't actually able to do it in the store, but fingers crossed we'll get to do it sooner rather than later. So thank you so much. Y'all have a good afternoon and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.